They called Earth's soldiers primitive. The words echoed across the galaxy as the war chiefs replayed combat footage of muddy trenches, bayonet charges, and human grunts screaming in the rain. Laughter erupted from every corner of the council chamber, a sickening, self-satisfied roar that reached even the outer colonies. To them, it was a joke. To Earth, it was a challenge. When the challenge was formally delivered, a gaudy broadcast dripping with condescension, the galaxy tuned in, expecting a grand humiliation. But on Earth, no speeches were made, no debates held. A single general quietly stood, leaned forward, and uttered two words that would rewrite history: send him. The war chiefs were larger than life, adorned in ceremonial armor, tusks polished, feathers gleaming, eyes glowing with arrogant anticipation. Their arena was infamous, a perfect sphere of brutal terrain constructed for spectacle. Above it, 1,000 cameras orbited, broadcasting every square meter. Gladiators from across conquered worlds trained for months to survive in it for a single day. Humans, they believed, were laughable in comparison, with their old rifles, improvised traps, and muddy boots. When Earth's acceptance arrived, it was baffling in its brevity: accepted. No fanfare, no conditions, no threats. Just a message so short that some broadcasters thought it a transmission glitch. The day of the challenge arrived. The war chiefs paraded their finest warriors into the arena, towering insectoids, armored reptilians, and snarling mercenaries from 10 star systems. They wielded plasma weapons, exoframes, and adaptive shields. Above them, the war chiefs delivered speeches dripping with mockery. Their translators gleefully echoed the insults in 20 languages, each more sarcastic than the last. The crowd roared. The camera drones panned toward the entry gate reserved for Earth's champion. Everyone expected a show of human desperation, maybe a battered platoon, a ragtag militia, or some grim-faced general hoping for an honorable death. Instead, a single, battered shuttle descended. Its paint was scorched. Its engines coughed black smoke. Its landing gear creaked as it touched the ground, tilting slightly to one side as if embarrassed to be there. The crowd howled in laughter. Some commentators openly mocked the shuttle's ancient design, pointing out its rust and mismatched panels. Then the ramp lowered slowly, creaking on ungreased hinges. A long, tense pause filled the air as the crowd strained for a glimpse of Earth's offering. A single human stepped out. He was lean, average height, clad in a plain jumpsuit that looked more like a mechanic's uniform than a soldier's armor. His boots were scuffed, his sleeves rolled casually to the elbows. A battered duffel bag hung from one shoulder. He didn't wear a helmet, didn't carry a gun, didn't even glance at the roaring crowd. Instead, he pulled a stick of gum from his pocket, unwrapped it slowly, popped it into his mouth, and began chewing with an expression of absolute boredom. The camera drones zoomed in, desperate for something impressive, a hidden weapon, a tactical implant, anything. But the commentators grew confused. There were no insignia on his chest. No medals. No rank. Just a plain patch of worn fabric on his shoulder, its faded symbol unreadable. When the announcer finally gathered the courage to speak, his voice cracked slightly: "Earth's champion has arrived." The crowd erupted again, this time in disbelief and glee. They jeered and shouted insults, comparing the human to a farmer lost on his way to a market. One alien comedian began narrating sarcastically: "Here he comes, the dread warrior of Earth, ready to harvest crops with his mighty duffel bag." But as the human walked slowly across the arena floor, seemingly indifferent to the thousands watching, something unsettling happened. The arena's massive gates behind him creaked shut, locking into place. The plasma barriers around the arena flared to full power. The commentators laughed louder. The war chiefs reclined smugly in their thrones. And the human stopped walking. He dropped the duffel bag at his feet, knelt down, and unzipped it slowly. The crowd leaned in, expecting a hidden rifle or some primitive explosive device. But instead, he pulled out a small, worn leather-bound notebook and a cheap plastic pen. Without glancing at the audience, he flipped to the first page, licked the pen tip, and began writing calmly. No one could hear what he was muttering at first, but soon a directional microphone picked up his voice. 2 words, repeated under his breath, target list. The crowd's laughter wavered slightly. The alien champions, who had been flexing and taunting, paused as their calms crackled and fell silent. Their heads turned toward the viewing box, confused. The war chiefs frowned, tapping controls on their armrests. Their secure channels were dead. Their commanders couldn't reach them. The camera feeds flickered. The commentators' jokes began to dry up as even their private earpieces stopped working. The entire arena, designed as a theater of humiliation, was suddenly isolated. And the human stood still, calmly writing in his notebook. The first champion, an armored insect twice the human's size, roared and charged forward, activating a plasma blade that hissed and crackled with blue energy. The audience cheered, convinced this would be over in a second. The blade swung down toward the human's exposed head, and met nothing but air. The human had simply sidestepped at the last instant with casual, almost lazy precision. His hand shot out, grabbed a handful of arena sand, and flung it backward over his shoulder directly into the insect's multifaceted eyes. A second later, the human pivoted, planted a boot into the insect's knee with brutal efficiency, and as the alien toppled forward screaming, the human calmly shoved him face first into the ground. Without breaking stride, the human stepped forward to face the next attacker. His notebook and pen were tucked neatly back into the duffel bag. Now the laughter had stopped completely. Somewhere in the observation deck, a war chief leaned forward, eyes narrowing. He noticed for the first time the strange symbols tattooed on the human's arms, revealed by his rolled-up sleeves. Ancient markings. Faded but deliberate. Primitive, yes, but something about them felt wrong. Dangerous. The human tilted his head slowly, cracked his neck, and smiled for the first time. It wasn't the smile of a desperate fighter or an angry soldier. It was the cold, casual smile of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. As the next champion stepped forward nervously, the human waved a hand in invitation. The crowd was silent now. And somewhere deep inside the war chief's grand hall, the first flicker of fear crept into their smug minds. The silence inside the arena had become heavier than steel. The crowd, once howling with laughter and jeers, now sat in stunned disbelief. The alien champions who had expected an easy victory shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Their formation, designed to intimidate, looked fractured. The human's casual stance seemed almost disrespectful. He made no move to attack, no dramatic gestures, no wasted motion. He simply stood there, arms loose at his sides, chewing his gum as if waiting for a bus rather than participating in the galaxy's most brutal spectacle. A commentator finally spoke up, his voice cracking with uncertainty as he tried to salvage the show. He joked about the humans. Lucky start. Bet it was surely just a fluke. But even he sounded unconvinced. Deep down, everyone watching felt it. This was no accident. The next challenger stepped forward, a towering reptilian clad in iridescent armor plates. His claws gleamed, and his breath hissed through armored slits as he raised a pair of plasma-forged axes. He roared, a deep thunderous sound that sent vibrations through the arena floor, but the human didn't flinch. Instead, he scratched the back of his neck lazily, almost as if bored, and then rolled his shoulders in a slow, deliberate stretch. The reptilian lunged, swinging both axes in a furious arc, confident that no organic being could move fast enough to dodge both strikes. But the human didn't dodge the way they expected. He didn't leap or roll. He stepped forward, closing the distance rather than retreating, and twisted just enough that the axes swept past him harmlessly. Then, with one hand he grabbed the reptilian's belt strap and pulled hard, sending the larger alien tumbling forward off balance. As the reptilian crashed into the sand, the human followed up with a boot heel to the back of the neck, pinning his opponent face down. There was no mercy, no hesitation, and no excessive violence. It was clinical, efficient, terrifying in its simplicity. The crowd was no longer booing or cheering. They were silent, transfixed, their collective breath held tight in their chests. The war chiefs, seated high in their observation deck, exchanged glances that betrayed their growing discomfort. They tapped their armrests, sending encrypted orders to arena security, but none of their commands were acknowledged. The control room was dark. The entire system was compromised, yet no one could explain how. The human's gaze swept over the remaining champions. His expression remained utterly calm, almost indifferent. He crouched next to the fallen reptilian and opened the duffel bag again. This time he didn't pull out a weapon or tool but simply removed a thermos, unscrewed the lid, and took a casual sip as if this was just another day at work. Somewhere in the audience, an alien merchant selling replica weapons dropped his tray with a loud clatter that echoed strangely in the hushed arena. It was as though the whole galaxy collectively realized they had severely underestimated their opponent. The next challenger hesitated. A hulking brute from a gravity world, his heavy bones encased in a massive exosuit designed to compensate for his planet's crushing gravity. He was easily 3 times the human's size, his fists larger than the human's head. Yet he took a cautious step backward instead of forward. The human locked eyes with him, raised one eyebrow in silent challenge, and then turned away dismissively as if the brute didn't even deserve his attention. That was all it took. Pride ignited, and the brute roared in rage, charging forward, his armored fists swinging like sledgehammers. But just as before, the human's movements were minimal. A sidestep. A pivot. The brute's momentum carried him past, and the human casually stuck out one foot, tripping the enormous creature. The brute stumbled forward, smashing face first into a stone outcrop, his exosuit sparking as systems failed on impact. The war chief's expressions shifted from amusement to disbelief, then from disbelief to fear. The human was dismantling their finest warriors with nothing but timing and simplicity. No advanced weapons. No exotic tactics. He wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was moving like a predator. The commentators, who had begun the day laughing and narrating each blow with biting sarcasm, were now completely silent. No one dared speak over the tension crackling in the air. From a distance, one could almost forget that this was meant to be a show, a grand spectacle of superiority. Instead, it had transformed into a lesson. Every warrior who had mocked Earth's combat doctrine now understood, this was not backwardness or primitiveness. This was refinement. Pure distilled violence honed over thousands of years, stripped of pretense and artifice. It wasn't that humans lacked advanced weapons. It was that this one man didn't need them. One of the smaller alien champions, a swift quadruped known for speed and agility, darted forward, weaving and leaping with impossible grace. The commentators found their voices again, hyping up this final hope. Surely speed would succeed where brute strength and armor had failed. But the human didn't even look at his attacker. He waited, breathing slow and steady, his eyes half-lidded as if listening to something else entirely. The quadruped circled faster, blurring around him. The crowd dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be a proper fight. And then the human moved. In a motion so fast and fluid it was almost invisible, he snapped out one arm at exactly the right moment, catching the creature's forelimb mid-sprint. The creature's own momentum did the rest, sending it flipping head over tail and crashing onto its back. Before it could recover, the human planted a knee on its chest, leaned down, and spoke for the first time loud enough to be picked up by arena microphones. Next. The crowd shuddered collectively. This wasn't a plea. It wasn't a boast. It was an invitation and a promise. The war chiefs were no longer laughing. They were leaning forward in their thrones, staring down at the arena, their tusked faces pale and tense. Their most elite champions, handpicked from dozens of conquered worlds, lay defeated in the sand without a single blow landing on the human. Above the arena, the camera drones wobbled, their systems glitching. Some feeds cut out entirely, replaced by static. The few that remained zoomed in on the human's tattoos again. Those strange ancient symbols. The commentators scrambled for an explanation. Some speculated they were ceremonial. Others guessed they were primitive war paint. But a few quiet historians watching the broadcast from deep archives recognized them for what they truly were, kill marks. Not painted for effect. Tattooed over years, one for every completed mission. Every life taken. The human stood slowly, brushing sand off his knees. His gaze rose to the war chief's observation deck. He didn't point. He didn't speak again. He just looked at them, chewing his gum with the same quiet calm as before. And in that gaze the war chief saw something that chilled them to their bones. He wasn't here to fight for sport. He wasn't here for honor or glory. He was here to finish a list. The sand in the arena felt different now, as though it remembered every footstep of the human who paced across it. The alien champions who remained were no longer standing tall and proud. They clutched their weapons tightly, but their eyes betrayed their doubt. The human had not needed armor or energy shields. He had not even raised his voice. He moved with a casual ease that mocked their training, as if he had seen this entire scenario before and already solved it in his mind. Every step he took felt like an answer to a question they had yet to ask. The arena was no longer a place of entertainment. It had become a stage of quiet execution. In the viewing deck high above, the war chiefs sat in silence, their tusked faces betraying cracks in their facade. The lead war chief finally broke the silence, slamming a fist onto the command console and growling orders in his native tongue. But the arena's security systems remained dark. No response. No acknowledgement. The technicians hidden in the control rooms had long since abandoned their posts, or simply locked themselves inside. The war chiefs were isolated in their own fortress, trapped behind their arrogance and spectacle. For the first time in generations, they realized they were vulnerable. Back on the arena floor, the human crouched beside a fallen champion. He reached into the duffel bag again, not for a weapon but for the battered notebook. Flipping it open with deliberate care, he removed the pen and calmly crossed out a name. The camera drone, still functional, zoomed in, transmitting the image to every screen in the galaxy. The commentators, once eager narrators of Bloodsport, said nothing. The silence was unbearable, every viewer holding their breath as the human closed the notebook with a snap and tucked it back into the bag. One of the remaining champions, a heavily armored quadrupedal beast with spikes lining its back, let out a low growl and circled warily. It tried to attack from behind, hoping to catch the human off guard, but the human did not even turn his head. As if sensing the intent, he pivoted on his heel at the exact moment the beast lunged and ducked low beneath the sweeping claws. His arm shot out, fingers wrapping around one of the creature's rear legs, and with a smooth, twisting motion he flipped it onto its side with impossible ease. Before the beast could recover, he planted a foot squarely on its exposed throat and pressed down until the growl became a gurgle, and then nothing at all. The crowd, which had been so loud at the beginning of this event, remained frozen. The galaxy had expected entertainment, a spectacle, a display of primitive human desperation. What they received instead was clinical efficiency. No wasted movement, no excessive force, no drama. Just one man methodically reducing every opponent to a heap in the sand. The war chiefs whispered among themselves now, voices tense and filled with a fear they did not dare show to their subordinates. This was not how it was supposed to go. Earth was supposed to be humiliated, their champion broken before a laughing audience. Instead, they had sent a man who did not fight like a gladiator at all. He fought like a ghost, an executioner, silent and precise. And now he was looking up at them. That gaze, sharp and unflinching, told them what was coming next. He had not come for their entertainment. He had come for them. Another champion tried to regain control of the situation, a tall and lithe figure armed with twin plasma blades. She moved with grace, darting forward with a blur of speed that had overwhelmed dozens of opponents in the past. But the human did not seem impressed. His stance did not change as she closed the distance. At the very last instant, just as her blades slashed toward his throat, he stepped inside her guard, too close for her weapons to matter. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, and with a sharp twist that elicited a sickening crack, he disarmed her completely. The blades clattered uselessly into the sand. Her face twisted in pain, but before she could react further, he pivoted behind her, hooked his arm around her throat, and dropped her to the ground with a chokehold so precise that she was unconscious in seconds. He laid her gently onto the sand, almost respectfully, then stood again and dusted himself off. Throughout it all, The human showed no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. Just focus. Cold, unrelenting focus. He wasn't just winning. He was making a statement that echoed through every corner of the galaxy. Human combat was not primitive. It was lethal. Efficient. Refined beyond their understanding. Now there were no champions left in the arena. The human stood alone, brushing sand from his sleeves as if finishing a chore. His head tilted slightly upward, eyes locking once more on the war chiefs in their observation deck. He reached into his bag and removed the notebook again. With slow, deliberate care, he opened it and turned to a fresh page. And there, without a word, he began writing. Line after line. Name after name. The war chiefs stiffened as they realized what he was doing. Their names. He was writing their names. Every one of them was being added to that list in front of the entire galaxy. No speeches. No threats. Just quiet, deliberate intent. And then the human did something unexpected. He sat down cross-legged in the sand, resting the notebook in his lap. He removed the gum from his mouth and flicked it aside carelessly. Then he leaned back, hands resting behind him, and looked perfectly relaxed, as if waiting for the next phase to begin. The war chiefs panicked. The lead war chief barked desperate orders, summoning their personal guards. A detachment of heavily armed enforcers appeared at the edges of the arena, encased in power armor and bristling with heavy weapons. The crowd watched with a strange mix of relief and fear. Surely this overwhelming force would put an end to the human's rampage. But the human did not even stand. As the enforcers advanced toward him, weapons aimed, the sand around him erupted in small, precise explosions. Landmines, carefully planted in advance. The enforcers were flung aside, their armor cracked and broken before they could even reach the center of the arena. The realization hit everyone at once. This entire fight had not been a reaction. It had been a plan. The human had been in control from the very first moment. Every step, every breath, every glance had been deliberate. He hadn't just come to fight. He had come prepared. And now there was no one left between him and the war chiefs. He stood slowly, brushing more sand from his clothes. He picked up the notebook, flipped it closed, and slid it into the duffel bag. Then, without a word or a backward glance, he walked toward the edge of the arena. The sealed doors that should have kept him trapped slid open at his approach, as if recognizing his authority. The crowd, silent and stunned, watched as he stepped through the threshold and disappeared from view. The war chief sat frozen, understanding at last that this was no entertainment. This was the beginning of their reckoning. The doors that had once sealed the human inside the arena now parted for him as though the entire complex recognized that it no longer belonged to the war chiefs. The air on the other side was cool, sterile, thick with the scent of metal and lubricant, a sharp contrast to the dust and heat of the arena floor. Somewhere deep in the command structure, engineers and technicians watched helplessly as the human's path became visible on every security feed they could still access. But their commands to lock bulkheads, trigger defensive drones, or even activate simple alarms were met with dead silence from the system. Everything was compromised. The human walked calmly, his footsteps slow and deliberate, his face devoid of emotion, his shoulders relaxed. In one hand, the battered duffel bag swayed gently. In the other, his fingers tapped a slow rhythm against his leg, as if listening to a tune only he could hear. Above it all, in the towering observation deck, the war chiefs scrambled. Their arrogance had evaporated. They had no jokes left, no smug glances to exchange. Their warriors lay broken and unconscious in the arena far below. Their elite enforcers had been blown apart before even crossing the sand. Their technicians had long since stopped answering their desperate calls for reinforcements. Now they could only stare at the security monitors as that lone human advanced steadily through the labyrinthine hallways of their fortress. Every turn he took was precise, as if he had memorized the layout beforehand. Every door he passed opened without resistance, systems bypassed in ways they could not comprehend. He did not run or rush. He didn't need to. The entire arena complex, built to humiliate Earth's champion, had become his hunting ground. One of the war chiefs, younger and less composed than the others, snapped at a terrified guard to prepare the escape craft. But as the order left his mouth, an image flickered on the large main screen of the observation deck. A camera feed showed the human already standing in the hangar bay, alone, leaning casually against the landing gear of the lead escape shuttle. The duffel bag sat at his feet. In his hands he held a simple object that made every war chief pale. A detonator. With a small flick of his thumb, he depressed a button. The shuttle behind him erupted into flame and debris, the blast visible through the observation deck's windows even before the video feed cut to static. The war chiefs froze. Their one means of escape was gone. The human had predicted this too. Everything they might have done to avoid what was coming had already been anticipated. The lead war chief, whose tusks had gleamed so brightly during the ceremony at the start of this farce, now sat hunched and shaking. He growled something to his bodyguards, a last desperate order to prepare a final stand. But even they hesitated, their eyes flicking toward the doorway as if they expected the human to simply appear at any moment. The corridors outside the observation deck were filled with guards. They had taken up positions behind barricades and energy shields, heavy weapons primed. These were veterans, soldiers who had fought in dozens of wars and campaigns. They had crushed rebellions, exterminated entire species. But none of that prepared them for what they now faced. The human appeared at the far end of the corridor, walking slowly, calmly, as if out for a stroll. No armor. No shield. Just a man in a plain jumpsuit, carrying nothing more than a duffel bag. The guards shouted warnings, ordering him to halt, but he didn't even acknowledge them. They opened fire, filling the corridor with a storm of plasma bolts that scorched the walls and lit the air with deadly light. For a heartbeat, it seemed impossible that anything could survive that barrage. But as the smoke cleared, they saw him standing there, untouched, the duffel bag now unzipped and sitting open at his feet. And at that moment, they understood their mistake. He hadn't needed to dodge. He had prepared this too. The floor beneath them buckled and exploded, tearing apart in a precise sequence. Mines, traps, rigged charges placed before the match had even begun. The guards were flung into walls and ceilings, their weapons shredded, their shields useless. In seconds, the corridor was silent except for the echo of the human's footsteps as he stepped carefully over the wreckage, his expression unchanged. Inside the observation deck, the war chiefs could do nothing but watch. He was coming, and there was no one left to stop him. Their elite soldiers were gone, their defenses in ruins, their escape blocked. The bravado they had flaunted when mocking Earth's combat doctrine was a distant memory now. All they could do was wait, gripping the arms of their ornate thrones with trembling claws. Then the doors to the observation deck opened with a soft hiss, almost polite in its quietness. The human stepped inside. His eyes swept the room once, calmly, as though checking inventory. The war chiefs stared back, frozen, their throats tight, unable to speak. The human took a step forward. His boots echoed against the polished floor. He set the duffel bag down beside the lead war chief's throne. Then he crouched, opened it carefully, and pulled out the battered notebook. With slow, deliberate movements, he flipped it open to a fresh page. One by one, he wrote their names. He did not speak. He did not threaten. He did not explain himself. He simply wrote, as if fulfilling a duty he had accepted long ago. The war chiefs sat paralyzed as their names appeared in the notebook, the pen scratching softly in the deathly quiet room. When he finished, he closed the notebook, tucked it into the bag, and rose to his feet. The lead war chief found his voice at last, a desperate, trembling growl asking why. But the human's only reply was to tilt his head slightly, as if the question didn't even warrant an answer. Instead, he reached into the bag one last time and withdrew a small, plain device. No complex mechanism, no advanced alien technology. Just a primitive Earth-made beacon. He pressed a single button and the beacon began to pulse. Somewhere far above the planet, unseen by all, an Earth gunship that had been waiting in low orbit locked onto that signal. No speeches. No negotiations. No mercy. The human walked past the war chiefs, ignoring their pleading eyes, and made his way to a side exit. As he disappeared down the corridor, the first rumble of incoming ordnance began to shake the observation deck. The war chief's empire was ending not with a triumphant display but with a quiet, methodical reckoning carried out by a single man. A man who had been underestimated from the very beginning. By the time the gunship's cannons began tearing through the fortress walls, the human was already gone, leaving nothing behind but names crossed off a list and a message no one watching would ever forget. The roar of the gunship's cannons did not just tear apart the fortress walls, it shattered the illusion of invincibility the war chiefs had built for generations. Debris rained down as the observation deck crumbled, its grand columns and thrones reduced to splinters and rubble. Dust and flame filled the air, choking any last words the war chiefs might have uttered as the structure came apart around them. Somewhere in the chaos, the beacon the human had placed continued to pulse steadily, guiding each precision strike as though the building itself was being erased from history according to a quiet, methodical plan. But the man who had orchestrated it all was no longer there. He walked calmly through the underground service corridors, his boots leaving faint prints in the dust. He did not rush. He never rushed. Every step was measured, deliberate, as though he was simply completing a long and necessary routine. Behind him, the thunder of collapsing walls and shouts of dying guards faded into silence. Before him, a maintenance tunnel led to the surface, a route few had even known existed, one that bypassed every checkpoint and security system. How had he known? How had he prepared it all? That question burned in the minds of the few survivors who watched the destruction from distant outposts. They would never know the answer. He never explained himself. He was not there to negotiate or to send a message. His actions were the message. At the tunnel's end, a battered transport waited. Its paint was faded, its frame patched and dented from long use, and it sat half-hidden beneath a rocky outcrop as if discarded. But its engines hummed steadily, ready. The human approached it without hesitation. He tossed the duffel bag into the back seat, brushed sand from his sleeves one last time, and climbed behind the controls. With a low rumble, the craft lifted off, rising above the smoldering remains of the arena fortress. The winds carried ash and embers across the desert landscape, glowing like fireflies in the dying light. The crowd that had once jeered and cheered now watched from the distance in stunned silence, as the ship angled upward and vanished into the sky. Across the galaxy, the broadcast ended not with triumphant music or gloating commentary but with a static image. The arena, empty and burning. The stands deserted. The viewing platforms cracked and crumbling. And one quiet detail no one could ignore, the empty throne of the war chiefs, shattered and broken, smoke curling from its remains. No one spoke on the broadcast. No commentator dared explain what had happened. The footage spoke for itself. The most advanced empire in the galaxy had been humiliated and destroyed not by a fleet, not by an army, but by a single human who had never raised his voice. On distant planets, those who had laughed at human tactics began to reconsider their mockery. In council halls and war rooms, commanders rewound the footage again and again, searching for clues, for weaknesses, for anything that might explain how one man had undone so much in so little time. But the recordings offered no answers. Only that calm, quiet figure moving through the chaos like a shadow, unbothered, unstoppable. The tattoos on his arms, long dismissed as primitive decoration, were now examined carefully by scholars and historians. Some recognized them at last. They were not symbols of ancient superstition. They were marks of service, old human military insignia dating back to forgotten wars. He carried not a uniform but a legacy, one written in scars and silence. And somewhere, buried deep in the archives of human command, his file remained sealed under layers of encryption. His designation was simple: no name, no rank, no unit insignia. He was not listed in any formal roster. No medals decorated his record. Only a note, brief and final, sent when all other options fail. Back on Earth, the general who had ordered his deployment sat in his office, staring at the silent screen that displayed the final transmission from the arena. he said nothing to his staff. No congratulations, no praise. He simply reached for a pen, crossed a line on a printed list, and filed the report away without ceremony. Another task completed. Another enemy humbled. Outside, his aides whispered in hushed tones about the man they had sent. Some wondered if he would return, if he would need reintegration or debriefing. But those who knew better understood he would not return. He never did. When his work was finished, he simply disappeared, slipping back into the shadows from where he came, waiting for the next time he was needed. Meanwhile, in bars and marketplaces across 1,000 worlds, the story began to spread. The tale of the one-man unit who had walked alone into the war chief's arena and left no one standing. Some embellished it with wild claims, that he had no heartbeat, that his eyes glowed in the dark, that he spoke a language no translator could decode. Others swore he had carried no weapons at all, that he had defeated an entire army with his bare hands and a handful of sand. Merchants sold trinkets bearing his likeness. Comedians hesitated to make jokes about Earth anymore. Even the most defiant warlords who had once plotted to invade Earth quietly shelved their plans, unsure if the same figure would appear should they ever dare test human resolve again. The war chief's territories fell into chaos without their leadership. Vassals fought among themselves, blaming each other for failing to stop the human. Their economy, once dependent on spectacle and conquest, collapsed overnight. Even their allies withdrew, unwilling to risk drawing Earth's attention. In a galaxy filled with advanced technology, fleets, and armies, it was the memory of a single human that kept them in line now. Somewhere far from the ruins of the arena, aboard a quiet freighter slipping through hyperspace lanes, the human sat alone in a small cabin. His duffel bag rested at his feet, the battered notebook tucked safely inside. The notebook's pages were nearly full, names crossed out in neat rows, each one a task completed. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and allowed himself a moment of stillness. For now, his work was done. But he knew the galaxy would not stay quiet for long. There would always be someone who would forget. Someone who would look at Earth and laugh. And when that day came, he would rise again. No fanfare. No speeches. No warnings. Just a quiet, methodical reckoning. The most dangerous one-man unit in the galaxy. Sent when all other options failed. The galaxy would remember. And it would think twice before ever laughing at human combat again. In the cold silence of space, the stars watched as the freighter carrying the human faded into the distance, slipping unnoticed among civilian traffic. No banners hung from its hull, no signals declared the presence of the galaxy's most dangerous asset. That was always the way it worked. He blended into the background, a shadow among shadows, never needing recognition, never seeking fame. Yet every government, every warlord, every merchant who had watched the destruction of the war chief's empire felt a quiet terror settle into their bones. Their minds could not comprehend it fully, but their instincts understood. A new rule now governed their galaxy. Earth had sent a message, not through words or declarations, but through action. A lone human had entered a warlord's stronghold, dismantled it piece by piece, and left before they could even form a coherent response. It was not an act of heroism or conquest. It was simply correction. In the wake of that act, the galaxy adjusted itself around the absence. The old networks of power that had orbited the war chief's brutal regime fell apart overnight. Petty dictators and ambitious generals hesitated before making any move that might draw Earth's attention. The broadcast of the Arena Challenge and its aftermath had reached every corner of known space. There was no debate over what had happened. The images spoke louder than any proclamation could have. The lone human, the simple duffel bag, the battered notebook, the methodical precision of his movements, and the quiet efficiency of his exit burned themselves into collective memory. Even those who had once scorned Earth's so-called primitive ways now revisited their assessments. Old footage of human wars was reanalyzed frame by frame, not to mock but to understand how such discipline could be forged, how someone could fight with such lethal calm. In back rooms and private war councils, analysts whispered about the one-man unit. What kind of training had produced him? What kind of mind could move through an arena designed for slaughter and emerge untouched, leaving only wreckage behind? Some speculated that he was the last survivor of an ancient human military program, a project so secret it had vanished from Earth's own history. Others spun darker theories, imagining that he wasn't fully human at all but an experiment, a blend of soldier and machine hidden beneath plain flesh. But the truth was simpler and far more unsettling. He was nothing more than human. Human in the purest, most distilled form, a creature evolved for adaptability, driven by instinct, sharpened by discipline, and patient enough to wait centuries if necessary for the right moment to strike. As weeks passed, stories about the human shifted from terrifying to legendary. Merchants sold carvings of his likeness in shadowy poses. Children played games where they pretended to fight in the arena and whispered about how he had used nothing but sand and timing. In cantinas and marketplaces, old veterans sat quietly when his name came up, offering no commentary but nursing their drinks a little longer and glancing over their shoulders just a bit more carefully. Even among Earth's allies, a certain unease settled in. They knew Earth was not boasting or seeking dominance, but the sheer efficiency with which the human had resolved the war chief's arrogance reminded them that their alliance was not built on charity. It was built on mutual respect, and on the quiet understanding that Earth would act decisively if ever pushed too far. Somewhere deep in an archive on a distant planet, a scholar unearthed forgotten records of Earth's oldest philosophies of war. He traced the roots of what he had seen in the arena back to texts that spoke of balance, discipline, awareness, and efficiency. The human who had dismantled an empire had not needed overwhelming force. He had only needed clarity and precision. The realization was humbling to civilizations that had long prided themselves on technological superiority, fleets, and advanced weaponry. In their arrogance, they had dismissed Earth's culture of war as outdated, inefficient, and crude. But now they saw that where their tactics relied on spectacle and intimidation, the humans' approach relied on something far simpler and more terrifying: absolute mastery. As the freighter drifted toward the outer systems, the human remained alone in his small cabin. The notebook sat on the table in front of him, closed now, its latest entries complete. The list was finished, for now. He leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed, listening to the low hum of the ship's engines. There was no celebration awaiting him. No parade, no medals, no speech from Earth's leaders. He did not want them. He did not need them. His work was not about recognition or power. It was about balance, a correction to arrogance. And he knew that somewhere out there, another empire was already making the same mistake. Somewhere, another leader was laughing at Earth's primitive ways, convinced they could defeat humans through technology, numbers, or brute force. When that day came, Earth would not send a fleet. They would send him again. No warning, no announcement. A single man with a battered duffel bag and a quiet gaze that said everything. And that was what frightened the galaxy most of all, not that Earth had such a weapon, but that they did not need to use it often. The fear alone was enough. Fear kept borders in place. Fear held the ambitions of warlords in check. Fear ensured that when humanity's name was spoken, it was done with a hushed respect, no matter how advanced or arrogant the speaker's own civilization might be. Back on Earth, no official statement was ever made about the war chief's collapse. The media did not cover the details. The governments did not debate it. There was nothing to discuss. As far as Earth was concerned, the matter was closed, a problem resolved, balance restored. The one-man unit would not be named in any record, and his presence would fade again into the shadows where he belonged. But in dark corners of space, his legend would only grow. Rumors would whisper of how he had entered the arena alone, how he had crossed every name from his notebook, how he had calmly walked away as the fortress burned. The image of his back disappearing into the shadows became a symbol, one that every ruler and general understood in the deepest part of their mind. There would always be a next time. The galaxy would forget again, sooner or later. Another arrogant power would rise, mocking humanity's ways, laughing at their history, convinced that Earth's age of warriors was over. And when they did, Earth would once again send him. No patch, no rank, no name. Just a man with a list. The most dangerous one-man unit in the galaxy, sent when all other options failed. Quiet, efficient, unstoppable. And that was all the message that needed to be sent.